So obviously, COVID brought us some interesting things when it comes to being in the rental market. As a landlord, you may or may not have been affected by it. And so tonight I'm just going to kind of give a bird's eye view as to what's been transpiring for a variety of landlords. So to kind of give you a little bit of a background, March 27th of 2020, Congress enacted the CARES Act, or Coronavirus Aid, Relief and Economy Security Act, which was a $2.2 trillion stimulus package to help with the fallout of residents not being able to pay rent. One of these stipulations was a temporary 120-day moratorium on evictions, and we sit here today 365 plus days later, and we're still in the moratorium. And during this moratorium, and even now, landlords were not allowed to issue a notice to vacate, file any unlawful detainers for non-payment of rent, or any other fees related to renting. So that means we couldn't, for late fees or a variety of other fees, we were not allowed to evict residents. Prior to all of this, we could. In addition to what Congress passed, Governor Newsom of California also passed an assembly bill requiring us to take our 3-day notices to 15-day notices, and that's business days, so no Saturdays, Sundays, or judicial holidays. Additionally, they went on to create 2 protected periods, and that was August of last year. The first one is rents from March 1st of 2020 through August 31st. That's a protection period. And then they added one more, which is the transition period, which are rents due from September to January. And there's different protections for each of those periods, mostly for landlords to be informed on when you can and can't file evictions, what you can and can't charge for. This January, another bill passed, which extended that initial moratorium deadline from January to June. So we're hoping, rumor has it, that will expire June 30th, and landlords that have been without rent and non-compliant residents, we can proceed with evictions. That's what we're hoping for. In January, they also added some additional protections, one being previously a resident had to sign a 15-day declaration and remit 25% of the rent. In January, they did away with the and 25% of the rent. So they simply have to remit a declaration. That 25% rent comes due June 30th if they haven't been paying it. He also established a $1.4 billion rental assistance program. So I'm going to stop it here because that's a lot of information all at once, and answer any questions there might be at this current moment.
I don't see anybody that's come through at this point.
Okay.
So we'll just continue on. Obviously, there's a lot of detailed information, so I'm sure people are just trying to wrap their head around it. I know that's what we've been trying to do for a year, correct? So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So moving on, then the rental assistance program was great news for residents and landlords. And essentially it's covering rent from April 2020 to March 31st, 2021. And under the current program, landlords can recover up to 80% of back owed rents. Now, I do want to mention, we got word a couple of weeks ago that there's a possibility that it could go to 100%. We don't know if that's going to happen, so we're not promising. We're going with what we know, and that's 80% at this point in time. Of course, there's always stipulations, and the major stipulation with this rental assistance is that landlords receive the 80%, but they must forgive the remaining 20% of the rent. While it's not as great as getting 100, it's definitely better than 0. And again, so landlords can't file eviction for non-payment of rent during this time. So how can a landlord qualify? Couple of major key points is that, first of all, you must own the property or be the property manager. You must have a resident, at least one, that hasn't paid rent between the periods. And it must have a COVID-related event. Lastly, you must have a lease agreement. And that's kind of like a no duh, but there are people out there that do things on a handshake or what have you, and they don't have an actual written lease. In terms of residents qualifying, they also must meet, and that's a key word, they must meet all three of these categories to actually be eligible. And so one of them meet unemployment benefits, other financial hardships, directly or indirectly related to COVID. And they must be able to prove it in writing. So word of mouth isn't going to fly. They want it in writing. And they must be able to demonstrate non-ability to pay and an income not more than 80% of the area median. And now that's important too as we get into the next slides, because that affects how monies are dispersed. Speaking of disbursement, the organizations that are dispersing these funds are doing them in 3 rounds. So those that fall less than the 50%, communities that were disproportionately impacted, such as Riverside, where they had such high rates of COVID. And then once those are dispersed, then they'll disperse to other applicants. So again, we'll pause because that's a lot of information going through.
Yeah, we have a question here from Barbara Kristen. She asked, what if the tenant hasn't paid rent from March to present, but they have been paying, but have caught up, but not through 2021?
Well, we'll know more come June 30th. We're limited to how we can apply rents that are being paid. If a resident doesn't say, apply it to my back rent, we have to apply it to current rent. And if they're applying it to current rent or back rent and not current rent, then that kind of opens a whole nother ball of wax.
Okay, and isn't also, we know that as of August 1st, no matter what, as it is today, as of August 1st, then you can file suit for all back rent or file an eviction, because basically all the gloves come off unless they change something between now and then. But as we see it right now, we don't see that happening. But August 1st, and also in small claims when it comes to rent, they have allowed to sue for as much money as the resident owes you. There is no limit, like $10,000 when it comes to rent. So if somebody owes you $40,000 of rent, you can file suit for that $40,000 along with an eviction. But it is very complicated because at every 3-month period, some you can apply for, and then they went another 3 months and passed another bill, and then you can apply it to this 3 months, but not the last 3 months, Barbara. So, but we're more than happy to talk with you on it tomorrow, and we'll make sure you have total clarity on it. Okay?
Yep.
Okay. All right. That's the one we have right there.
Okay, perfect. So some important points to remember with all of this, because it is overwhelming. And like Ron mentioned, we've put a lot of time into making sure we're understanding it. Landlords will receive, that is one thing that Governor Newsom said, is you will receive it. And depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, some organizations are paying 100% of back owed rent. And even forward, we have recently received approximately 5 back owed rents, bringing them current and paying them into the future, which has been really nice for those landlords and residents. If you accept the 80%, you agree to waive the 20% that is part of the stipulations of the funding being dispersed. And the landlord can refuse to participate. And we know some that haven't. However, the resident can apply on their own behalf and collect 25%, not the 80, but the 20, because again, part of the stipulations with the declarations, they have to sign a declaration and pay 25% to avoid eviction. And so the organizations are allowing residents to apply on their own behalf, collect the 25%, pay it to the landlord, and then they won't be able to file eviction on that. Having said that, if a resident refuses to participate, the landlord cannot proceed with the process. So that does make it a little bit more difficult. However, when we can file evictions, it'll make it a little bit easier to move it on through.
Okay. Yeah, we have a couple more questions here. Barbara also asks, are there forms that she needs to provide the tenant? And the answer to that is we can get you all that information, Barbara. As far as tomorrow, there is a process you have to go through, but it's not that difficult, okay? And then we also have a question here from Robert. What are the restrictions to sell the investment property come June 30th if the tenant is still not paying and they are out of the lease?
That's a great question. That is a stipulation of the ability to file. You would need to give the resident notice to vacate first. If they fail to vacate at the end of their 60-day notice, we can file eviction on that. But you do have to give them notice. So just because their lease has expired, it rolls to month automatically in most cases. And then if you want them to vacate, we do have to properly serve them. If they don't vacate, evictions will proceed. We do have a couple of those, and they are proceeding. We've been successful at completing those evictions. So if you have more questions on that, feel free to email me and we'll be happy to answer those directly for your specific properties.
Yes, because come July 1st, as we see it today, we're going to be able to file evictions normally after and serve 3-day notices. We don't have to wait 15 days and the clock starts, ticking on them. So things will move very rapidly in about another 40 days compared to what it has been, providing, and I want to say providing, we don't have new legislation that comes down that changes all that. So yes, okay, that's all the questions that Robert had and Barbara had there.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that concludes my section on eviction. Now I'm going to